We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast. This is Abe, your host. Today is July 24th, Saturday. It's 8:40 p.m. Figured I'd get a little bit of work done before I went into my actual day job. Like I said, I got kind of like a new routine going on with the podcast. I'm going to put out like heavy hitter episodes, some black pill stuff, and then every other episode I'm going to kind of put out like a chill, just for fun, entertainment only episode. As far as updates, just been working, been tired, been reading a series of unfortunate events. The books are awesome. The movie and the TV show kind of suck. Like the TV shows, it's not too bad, but the movie's horrible. But yeah, I've just been reading it, going through the series and stuff. I had read like the first two books growing up, and Sammy had bought me the third book, like I think it was like last year, the year before, when this, pandemic started, and I was unemployed at the time, so I read it and picked up the series again, started reading again. So I don't know, normally I usually try to stay away from fiction, but with all this research that I've been doing and podcasts that I've been doing, I don't know, I feel like I kind of need a break sometimes from reality. It's a little dark, a little bleak. So I've been steering more towards fiction, I feel like, the older I've gotten. As weird as that sounds, I almost did like an invert. Most people usually drift towards nonfiction the older they get. I kind of reversed. But today's episode, we are covering Sid Vicious again. I like to put kind of goofy, crazy stories on here sometimes. We did do a whole episode on the murder mystery of Sid and Nancy. We did a two-parter. I'll try to leave those in during the credits if you're watching on YouTube, so you can just click on those if you want to check those out. It's kind of like a timeline of their life and the mystery of the murder. Was it Sid? Was it the drug dealer? All that jazz. But yeah, we'll get into it. This is just a goofy, crazy story that I found and thought it was interesting. So this was a story I found interesting. It's from Steve Dior. It's called Guilty by Association. He was a friend of Sid and Nancy. Sid and Nancy. What can be said that hasn't already been said? Filmed, mythologized, sodomized, commercialized. Iconic stature bestowed upon two of life's greatest, biggest fuck-ups. True life is so much more, real compared to fiction. Stories, gossip, the stuff of legends, the pudding of life. What am I talking about? Okay, this is the problem. I was there. I know what happened. Who fucked who gives a fuck, what was said, what she was wearing. Going down in history for murdering your old lady is not my idea of a legacy. Poor old Sid. I'm not sure what he'd make of all the fuss and discussion and fascination that continues to intrigue new generations of disenchanted youth. Who am I kidding? He'd fucking love it. And so would Nancy. The self-fulfilling prophecy of love kills is somehow created and catered for everybody. It suits its purpose for us and also for Sid and Nancy. The Romeo and Juliet of punk rock. Nice and neat. Beautifully packaged for our consumption. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, and of course, murder. That is the myth. What is the truth? In my book, he doesn't kill Nancy, but he is suspect number one. So who did it? I believe the New York police knew, but chose not to pursue it after Sid's death. Several sets of prints on the switchblade were analyzed and confirmed what the NYPD already knew. Fingerprint analysis identified other prints belonging to a character named Michael, who had previous criminal history. This guy started hanging out about 2 weeks before the murder. I asked Sid, "Hey, who's that guy?" To be told, "Oh, Nancy really likes him." And that was that. He was obviously dealing to them, so he was considered useful. Both Nolan and I had our suspicions. You can't bullshit a bullshitter, as Jerry would always put it. I was questioned by the NYPD. The detectives were only interested in Michael. Did I know him? Where was he? I was not much help. Sid was arrested on circumstantial evidence. Yeah, sure, he was there at the scene of the crime, but by all accounts was completely unconscious on smack and Quaaludes. Yeah, Quaaludes, man. That was back in the day. It was basically like being drunk without smelling like alcohol. I don't know. I would have loved him. I ain't gonna lie. Sid awoke the next morning to find the room empty. Unbeknown to Sid, Nancy was in the bathroom, either dying or dead from a stab wound received the previous night. Sid went downstairs to get his methadone, thinking Nancy had already left. When he came back, he found her body and called the hotel reception. The money that Nancy carried in her purse was gone. $3,000 at any given time was what she usually carried. Sometimes I would walk behind her to pick up $20 and $50 bills, even $100 bills, as she walked through the lobby of the Chelsea Hotel. By the way, for anyone who likes paranormal, the Chelsea Hotel is supposed to be haunted as fuck. There's people who have supposedly seen Sid's ghost there and stuff, which is pretty cool. I've always wanted to stay. Of course, I always give it back to her and told her to be more careful. Seems to me that the opportunity was too good for someone. Sid, unconscious, Nancy, probably a little too out of it, and $3,000 spilling out of her purse. Michael disappeared. Malcolm McLaren came over to the U.S. Jerry Nolan, my sister Esther, and I went downtown to the arraignment to give moral support. The world's press was there. Sid looked dejected and stood head hung, pale, while the charges were read. Richard Branson's Virgin Records bailed him out. His mother, Ann Beverly, was also now part of the tight little group that tried to protect Sid from the hostile world around him, and also from himself. I had a 2-room apartment on 3rd Street, between 1st and 2nd. Famous because the Hells Angels of New York lived on the block and protected it. It was decided that Sid and his mom would hole up there for a few days. It was there that I found myself suddenly alone with Sid after the circus of the court that morning. I had the overwhelming desire to ask him, "Did you do it?" My relationship with Sid had changed dramatically over 2 years. I had first seen him hanging out at early Sex Pistols shows, the Nashville Rooms, the 100 Club. He hated me at first. I think mainly because Johnny Rotten decided I was too cool and much better looking, and I lived in Kensington. A couple of times Sid had tried to engage me in some sort of physical intimidation or confrontation. He'd kick up his long, thin legs with his motorcycle boots, trying to kick me in the head. I used to be very kung fu about it, and I'd move my head from side to side at the very last moment. Someone like Keith Levine would shout, "Oi, Sid, leave that kid alone." And miraculously, he would listen. I would be safe until our next meeting. Sid had a mental streak in him that was always bubbling under the surface. There was always trouble around him. Life was too dull without drugs or someone to take the piss out of. In the early days, I was part of a little group that had a common sense of identity, namely using sulfate, listening to music like Dillinger, Iggy Pop's The Idiot, Velvet Underground, and learning to play guitar. Viv Albertine, later of the Slits, had a very groovy pad off of Fulham Road. It was here that Sid would come over to hang out for days. Keith Levine was the first junkie I ever met. Soon I was hanging out regularly with him, Viv, and Alan Drake, a very pretty bisexual friend of ours who had a brief love affair with Sid. We were a tight bunch, teaching each other guitar shit. Sid was a lot of fun on speed, always laughing and fucking around with you, talking music quite intelligently, or else with his sense of humor, take the royal piss. We all loved Sid more than he'll ever know. We put up with shit and loved him for it. I've never liked violence. To me, it had always been the ugly side of human nature. Anger and the source that often leads to bring people to that point. Sid often displayed an aggressive nature when he felt threatened, either by someone saying something or somebody just looking at him in the wrong way. I had the honor one night of trying to separate Sid and Captain Sensible, he was the guitarist for the Damned, who were rolling around in broken glass on the floor of the Roxy Club after a Heartbreakers gig. After 5 minutes of them punching the shit out of each other, they embraced warmly as brothers. Nancy used to work on 53 and 3rd, which became a famous Ramones song. Dee Dee wrote it, and I think he actually sang it too. Or at least he sang like a solo bit in it. She also liked rock and roll. She became friends with Dee Dee Ramone and Thunders and Nolan of the Heartbreakers, supporting all their habits and often paying to get guitars out of Hawk. Hooker with a heart of gold. I heard Nancy's stories from Nolan even before she arrived in the UK, a figure of ridicule and scorn. She arrived in London with Nolan's Fender Stratocaster. She paid a ticket at the pawn shop, thinking how pleased Jerry would be. She turned up at 47A Warrington Crescent, Maida Vale. I lived there with my guitarist, Barry Jones. Nolan was hanging out with us. When I told him, "There's a blonde at the front door with a guitar who says she knows you," Nolan jumped up and went to the door. He came back with the guitar in hand, but minus the blonde. Who was that and where'd she go?" "Ah, fuck, that's Nancy." I grabbed the guitar and slammed the door in her face. Welcome to the UK. Sid and Nancy moved in around the corner of 47A to 3 Pendock Mews. Advances from the Sex Pistols afforded them a very nice Mews house. Sid and Nancy were now permanent fixtures at 47A. We had a small recording studio under the sidewalk. Some music and lots of drugs were the order of the day. Heroin habits require daily attention. Sid and Nancy often required connections or sources. One night, Barry Jones, Sid, Nancy, and myself found ourselves in a rundown squat in Kilburn, waiting to score. The building was filled with dodgy customers, as would happen. Sid and the guy on the first floor got into it. Over what? I can't tell you. The next thing I knew was Sid's hurling, frisbee-like, a piece of glass that narrowly missed taking this guy's girlfriend's head off, smashes inches from her face. The pissed-off guy now stabs Sid in the leg. Bleeding and pleading not to take him to the hospital, we managed to get taxi to emergency. I was a witness to several violent incidents in the 3 or so years that I knew Sid. I was there at New York at the New York nightclub when Sid smashed a glass in Patti Smith's brother's face. We were lucky to escape with our lives. Peter Kotick dragged us out, but Sid got sent back to Rikers. Another time at Dingwall's, Bruce Foxton from the Jam decided both to bait Sid, and we were standing at the bar. Sid lost out on this account. Foxton fighting was actually a nasty piece of work. Now the next story is basically the title of this episode. It's an insane story, and I don't know, I thought it was interesting, so I hope you enjoy. I do have one morbid story that not many people have heard. One day I got a call from Jane Hargrave, who lived with Matt Dangerfield of The Boys. In the front room at 47A, on this particular afternoon, she was alone and looked out the kitchen window to see a dead body. Could I come over? I jumped in a taxi. Sure enough, there was a stiff lying on his back. It was in an enclosed courtyard between the buildings, and this chap had either fallen or jumped. He had been dead for a while. His face was black and purple, and rigor mortis had set in. The doorbell went, and Sid arrived, also very curious about our discovery. Sid was eager to go through his pockets, and found about $40. His watch came off, but his rings wouldn't come off due to his swollen fingers. Finally, we called the police. We had fun chatting with the policewoman who was put in charge of watching over the body. We sat in the kitchen drinking tea with our dead friend outside the window. Another normal day at 47A. Before Sid went to America for the ill-fated Sex Pistols tour, Sid asked me and Barry Jones to look after Nancy. We promised. She would show up and offer to cook dinner, baked beans and fish fingers. Not easy to fuck up, but she did. Sometimes we would go around to Pindock Mews. Sid would call from the USA while we were there, telling Nancy his war stories on the road. One such story was that Sid had fucked a transvestite. Nancy was really excited and wanted to know the gory details. That's all right, Sydney, as long as you don't fuck any girls, she would say. I got to see many tender moments between Sid and Nancy. My memories are fond. I remember clearly the moment I summoned up the courage to ask him about Nancy. We sat alone in my apartment on 3rd Street. I wanted to ask him, but I was really scared. Finally, Sid, I've got to ask you, did you do it? No, Steve, I didn't. I didn't kill Nancy. And this is another little ending section to this account, the Max's gigs. My new band, The Idols, after London Cowboys, had been operating for about 6 months when Sid and Nancy came to New York. I had the best rhythm section in town. Jerry Nolan and Killer Kane from the New York Dolls. Playing with Sid was a no-brainer. Originally, Johnny Thunders was offered the other guitar spot, on that condition that he was somewhat straight. I was there when Nolan called him. Johnny, if you turn up looking the least bit silly, I'm walking out. Thunders never showed up. Too many junkies on one stage is a recipe for disaster. I knew the Clash were recording at the Record Plant Studio, London Calling. I rang Mick Jones, and then I had to go there to persuade him to play. After the first show, Sid said he didn't like Mick's guitar playing because he played too much lead. So that was the only show he did. The first show wasn't recorded, but thankfully 2 more nights were. And here they were, in all their rough and ready glory. But that's it for that morbid Sid Vicious story that I wanted to share with you all. We do have, like I said, this is just kind of more of a fun episode because I like to do the heavy hitter and then do a fun one, do a heavy hitter, do a fun one, kind of like a checkered board. Give you guys breaks, because the heavy hitters, man, they can leave you just honestly blue and depressed afterwards. But I feel that I have this platform, I have this channel, I have this, chance to tell you all what I know, try to bring the information to the people. Um, I don't know, I feel like it's kind of an obligation to share that info. Um, Try to wake some people up or inform people who are already awake of something they may not know. But we do have a little extra time, so I'm going to give you guys a bonus paranormal ghost story. But buckle in and we'll give you guys one more story and we'll head on out of here. So this next story is Where You Never Dine Alone. It's based in Johnstone's Inn, Ashland, Massachusetts. As Dwayne and Rita Dowtrey left their apartment on the outskirts of Boston to go out to dinner, Rita was still urging her husband to change his mind and go to a restaurant nearby. Ashland is 25 miles from here, she complained, and the weather report says it may snow today. There's always that possibility in winter, said Dwayne, but we can't hibernate until spring. His wife looked at him crossly. But I hate driving in the snow. That's because you're from the South and not used to it. No, it's not that. I don't know why I feel this way tonight. It's like something is going to happen. And part of it will be because of the snow. That's all. Something will happen. We will eat a sumptuous dinner in a historic inn where the past will come to life. About 40 minutes later, the Dowtreys were entering Ashland, driving toward the center of town. They heard the mournful wail of a train whistle. Then came the noisy clatter of the wheels as a diesel engine. Car after car rumbling behind it sped by. The track was very close to the road. Wham, wham, wham went the freight cars as they passed. Rita sat quietly, watching the slots of gray March dusk pass swiftly between each car and giving herself up to the hypnotic sight. She could feel the nose of their Honda shuddering at the impact of the wind from the train. It runs right through the middle of town, just the way trains used to do, said Dwayne nostalgically. Doesn't slow much for Ashland, does it? No, it certainly doesn't. Trains weren't one of Rita's favorite topics. She had a conflict of interest with one once about a crossing, and the train had won. Rita had miraculously emerged unscathed, but the incident had made her heart beat faster every time she saw a crossbars without a grate and heard the approach of a train. The inn should be right along here somewhere. She turned and saw it. There it is on the corner. Oh, Dwayne, I love it. They parked and got out of the car. Johnstone's Inn at 179 Main Street was painted a cherry New England red, and for a moment Rita stood staring at it and the black colonial-style sign out in front. On it was painted the stern countenance of a man of another era. An old-fashioned balcony on the second floor was supported by white columns running the length of the inn. On the third floor, two dormer windows perched near the peak of the roof. Lights glowed welcoming in the windows of the first two floors and the large wing on the side. Only the windows on the third floor were dark. It would look perfect on a Christmas card, if only these gables were lighted too, said Rita. Yes, it would, said Dwayne. Let's go in, I'm freezing. Once seated in the restaurant, Rita took off the hunter green car coat with its hood. Holding the menu in one hand, she fluffed out the back of her long black hair with the other. How lovely she was, thought Dwayne, watching her as she studied the menu. She debated between beef I can't even pronounce that, and chicken Grand Marnier. 2 brandies first, please, said Dwayne to the waiter, after they had both decided on the beef. They carried their glasses over to the fireplace, and Rita talked about the upcoming magazine story, a trip trailing tigers in Sumatra. She was a freelance writer. How could she be so daring about some things and so fearful about others, he wondered. Old John Stone is giving us the eye, said Duane. See his picture over the bar? Rita turned her head and smiled. He almost seems to know something we don't. A secret? At that moment the front door opened and an icy gust blew in with two couples, their coats flecked with snow. A real blizzard's blowing out up there, said one of the women, shivering. Not much chance of that this time of year, ma'am, replied the hostess. Duane saw Rita pale, but she turned away from the new arrivals. She was listening to one of the boys clearing a table. But, sir, I did see someone downstairs near the storage room, he was saying to the manager. The rest was lost, for the boy was hustled into the kitchen. It's a good time for the grand tour of the inn while everyone is waiting for their food. Would you like to go along? Asked the hostess, stopping by the fireplace. That sounds wonderful, said Rita. Well, if it's no trouble, Duane replied, with limited enthusiasm. He was enjoying the warmth of the fire. Joining them, the young assistant manager had overheard the exchange. Oh no, my pleasure, he replied. Several other diners came too, and they all formed a procession down the stairs into a cellar. Slaves were kept here in this hidden room during the Civil War until it was safe for them to go on their way to Canada, their guide said, with the air of one who had given this tour many times before. It was part of the Underground Railroad, he explained. I've heard stories that some people have heard the voices of the slaves singing. Then there is a story about the ghost of a little girl. People who have seen her say that she sits staring forlornly through the kitchen window. Oh, I hope we will see something tonight, giggled one of the women. Well, I can't guarantee that, but we have had all sorts of odd phenomena. Glasses floating through the air, an ashtray suddenly splitting in two. Once a tray flew through the air and hit one of us in the head. Oh, watch out, guys, said the same woman. You'd probably be the very one something would happen to, Joe, she said, grasping her husband's arm. Down here is where something really scary happened, continued their guide. A manager who once worked here was in this room and saw a transparent figure that he was convinced was old man John Stone. Bad thing about it was, he saw it just before his own death. All the help thought it had been a sign, a kind of warning. He opened another door. This used to be a game room. Stone and his friends were playing poker one night, and one of the players, a salesman, accused them of cheating. Old John was enraged, continued their guide, warming to his story. Swinging his clenched fist, the assistant manager showed them how. Stone, with one blow to the head, struck the salesman and killed him. I've always heard that his body is buried somewhere beneath this floor. Rita shivered. The other guests looked like they'd wish something would happen. But no spirits put in an appearance, nor did anything else out of the ordinary occur. The tour was drawing to a close. One word of warning, said the assistant manager with a grin. Remember that when you dine at John Stowe's Inn, you never dine alone. At least that's what people here in Ashland say. There was a momentary silence. Then someone laughed, and the others joined in. I propose a toast to an unforgettable evening, said Duane, back at their table. He raised his brandy glass, waiting for Rita to follow suit, but she hesitated. Her lips parted in an amused smile. Does unforgettable mean I'll see a ghost, honey? If it does, I'll drink to that. As the brandy touched Duane's lips, the oddest thing happened. He felt a firm tap on his left shoulder. Yes, he said, turning his head, but no one was there. What did you say, honey? Said Rita, looking up. Nothing, just thinking out loud, Duane improvised quickly. He must have imagined that someone had touched his shoulder. That's all it could have been, but it left him with an uneasy feeling that was not to go away. The Dowtrees ate in silence. They heard the long, drawn-out whistle of one of the many passing trains, then the sound of the locomotive and the rumble of cars as they went by. Train whistle has an eerie sound at night, doesn't it? Said Rita. Oh, I don't know, said her husband. It did, though, and for some reason Dwayne was beginning to feel the faintest sense of dread. Had it started with Rita's original desire to go somewhere else? Or was it the tap that he thought he felt on his shoulder? He dismissed these things as foolishness. Dwayne glanced at his wife and saw her wince slightly and move her hand. What's the matter? He asked sharply. Nothing. For a moment, I thought I felt something touch me. Like what? A little like fingers placed over my hand, she stammered, flushing with embarrassment at how melodramatic her words sounded. That's ridiculous, Dwayne said, a little too loudly. He knew he was overreacting and went on lamely. Perhaps someone touched you accidentally as they passed our table. I'm sure that was it, agreed Rita. Did you know that this inn was built more than 150 years ago? She said, changing the subject. Yes, I read it on the back of the menu. It was finished in 1833 by a wealthy sea captain named John Stone. The inn is named after him. Figures, said Dwayne, smiling. Rita gazed with interest up at the exposed beams. I know a magazine that runs pieces on early American homes and inns. It would probably buy a story on this place. Snow stopped, announced a new arrival. Dwayne saw Rita's shoulders relax, and she leaned back more comfortably in her chair. There was something about her now that reminded him of a lovely, sleek cat lolling in a comfortable spot. He guessed that she had been uptight about the weather, and that had startled her imagination working overtime. Fingers touching her hand, indeed. But he, too, was relieved the snow had stopped, so why couldn't he rid himself of the crazy sense of dread? If there were really ghosts here, what dire meaning could a tap on the shoulder have? Was it to warn him that his time had come? Even thinking something like that really made him a first-class crazy, thought Dwayne. He sipped the last of his coffee. Helping Rita on with her coat, Dwayne gave her a little hug. That evening had been pleasant, but he had the feeling that it was not over, at least not yet. At the cash register, he thanked the assistant manager for the tour. Dwayne opened the door of John Stone's inn and emerged to find that snow was falling again, heavily. Within seconds, he could hardly see Rita. She was halfway across the street when he caught up with her hurrying figure. This was almost a blizzard. Could he see well enough to drive back to Boston in weather like this? They heard the sound of a train whistle. Suddenly, Dwayne squeezed Rita's arm. Look, there's a stalled car on the track, and a man trying to push it off. My God, a train's coming. Even with the flakes swirling around them, they saw the snow-covered figure on the tracks pushing the rear of a sedan. A woman screamed. Again they heard the wail of the whistle. Dwayne dashed toward the stalled car, Rita following. They heard the roar of the fast-approaching train. Stop, Dwayne, stop, Rita shouted, but her husband never heard her. Her cry was lost in the clatter of train wheels. The engine burst out of the darkness, striking the car with a horrendous crash. Rita heard the tearing of metal and finally screeching brakes. Somewhere, up the tracks, the train shuddered and jerked to an emergency stop. At the side of the tracks, a stunned-looking couple stood hugging each other. They had abandoned the car just in time, but where was Dwayne? In the fast-falling snow, Rita could not see him, nor could she see the man who had been vainly trying to push the car off the tracks. Then she tripped over something. It was the crumpled body of a man. She bent down and saw the snow-covered overcoat. Oh God, she thought, it's Dwayne, he's dead. Dwayne, Dwayne, she began screaming. The figure on the ground struggled to his knees, almost fell, and then tried again and managed to rise to his feet. It was her husband. Hugging him around his neck, Rita burst into tears. I'm okay, calm down, honey. Where's the man who was trying to help me push the car? I haven't seen him. Dwayne, the assistant manager from the inn, and several guests organized a search. The sound of screeching train brakes had brought everyone out of the inn. The trainman, who had run back to the crossing, helped them comb each side of the tracks, thinking that the man may have been dragged along by the train. The inn sent a thermos of coffee out to the trainmen. They continued searching, but whoever had been trying to push the car off the tracks was nowhere to be found. The train went on. By now the snow was fluttering lazily down in great flakes. The fierceness of the wind had abated, and visibility was greatly improved, but nobody, alive or dead, could be found. Finally, with wet, snow-encrusted shoes and clothing, the Dowtrees and the other guest who had helped search went back to the inn and sat around the fire. When the assistant manager of the inn joined them, Dwayne was saying, "I thought I could push him off the track and save him. Should we look more?" "There's no need to," said the assistant manager, his eyes dark and strange. "But he could be dying out there somewhere," persisted Rita. "I don't think so," he said. "Do you remember my mentioning on the tour that our former manager, John Dubose, was killed a few years ago in front of the inn?" "Yes," said Dwayne. "But what does a badly injured man lying out there somewhere in the snow have to do with John Dubose?" "Well, there was a late March snowstorm much like this one. John was trying to push a stalled car off the tracks when the train struck him. When you left the inn tonight," the manager seemed reluctant to continue. "Yes, what about it?" "I think that's what you saw was the ghost of John Dubose out there on the tracks." "His ghost? Good Lord. Now I understand. Part of his face was gone." Dwayne shuddered. "Yes, we found him that way. Seeing his face was such a shock that I threw myself back from the tracks. That's why the train didn't hit me." His eyes were filled with awe. The man whose life had been trying to save was already dead.
We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.